so let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
Who is Sally?
Who is Sally? Sally, my mother? I love that. I love that. Okay. Sally is my mother. My name is Memphis Garrett. I am a Big Brother 10 and Big Brother All-Star contestant, and I'm also a restaurateur and an avid entrepreneur. Memphis is a nickname. My legal name is Robert. So when I left Tennessee at about 19, I moved to Atlanta, and a guy started calling me Memphis. When I worked at a restaurant, I was a bar back at a restaurant, and that's kind of where it was. And then it stuck, and that was a long time ago. I was born in Western Kentucky in a town called Paducah, and I grew up there till about 6, and then I moved to Tennessee, and then I moved to Georgia, and then I went to college at Florida State, and then finished school, and then I moved to California, and I lived in LA for about 8 years, and then I moved to Las Vegas, and I lived there for 3, and then I moved to South Florida, and now I live in Fort Lauderdale, and I've been here for about 5 years, and I think I'm staying put.
So is it true that your mother worked in restaurants and bars and you would go there and...
That is true. Yes. Yes. So that was kind of the intro for me into hospitality. You know, she was a waitress at a place in Paducah, Kentucky called Whaler's Catch. And I used to sit at the end of the bar and drink Shirley Temples and eat fried shrimp and basically wait for her to get off. And that was kind of like where I really got kind of the bug or got introduced to hospitality. I mean, I've always had that eagerness and that drive to make money. And no matter which way or how I could do it, I did it. So there were definitely situations that were questionable on my mother's mind that definitely I had to explain myself. Like selling fake Nikes on the street corner. Yeah, I used to go away like the weekends at like 16, and I would sell shoes on the street corners of Nashville. And I did Persian rugs for a little bit. I did, and I've sold it all. But yeah, you know, anything. I did a lot of entrepreneur stuff. Like I had a lawn mowing company that I did on the side, and then I did stuff like the biggest and the funniest probably story is I was probably in 10th grade, and my mom came home, and I had about $15,000 laid out on the table, and I was counting it, and she lost her mind because she thought I was like selling drugs or something. But I had basically created a T-shirt for my high school of about 2,000 students. And I got it designed, and I basically took pre-orders, and I sold them to all the classmates. And they were a little bit, you know, they weren't necessarily approved by the school because it was a monster truck running over all the competitors, and their heads were falling off. And like, I don't know, it was a little bit kind of on that level. But I sold like thousands of shirts, and I pre-ordered everything, so I didn't have any excess waste, and I didn't have any overhead that wasn't accounted for. So I made a lot of money doing that, and I did that a few times over. So stuff like that, I was always like, always trying to do something. But I would never tell my mom what I was doing, and then she would figure it out, and she'd get pissed, and then I'd have to explain myself, and then she wasn't as mad.
So were you a good student?
Yeah, I was decent. I had a mentality of whether I passed or not, or whether I did good on a test or bad on a test. I always had this certain mentality that I could figure it out. Meaning, so we talked my way to a grade, do extracurricular activity, mow the teacher's yard. It didn't even matter. I was just like, I just always had that like, okay, I might have failed that test, or I might have an average of a C and I need a B. And I always just like figured it out. I was I don't know. I always had this like mindset of like, it wasn't done. I was always willing to do something else. And it went a long way because I was I think I was the treasurer for our school, for our student body. And I think I was running to be the vice president or something of the student body. And basically they're like, your GPA is too low. You shouldn't even be in this position. Like, you're not allowed. Like, you have to have this. And I was like, I'm not taking no for an answer. I like went and met with the principal, and I was like, I need to do this. I want to do this. And he like signed off that I could run, and then I won. And it's like this whole thing. But like for me, I was like, I wasn't willing to take no. I was like, look, there's always a way. There's always a will. And I think I don't think everything's so black and white either. I think there's certain rules set in place for certain things. I mean, it was the same thing in Florida State. Like they were like, oh, well, you need this GPA. And I was like, I'm going to figure it out. You know what I mean? I'm going to sort it out. I'm going to get into that school. And that's kind of how I've always been, and determined and realizing that there are steps that you're going to have to take. I speak at a lot of hospitality schools in South Florida, and I talk to a lot of like, kids that are, a little bit older than your students, but ultimately, they're looking to get into hospitality. And my biggest driver is I tell them kind of like how I got started. And it's all about like, look, I knew where I wanted to be, but I also knew that it was going to take a lot of hard work. And I also knew that I was going to have to make sacrifices, and that it wasn't going to come overnight. And that's really hard, I think, with the kids that are, kind of coming out of college now, and maybe even going into college, is that, look, you're not going to get what you want when you ride out of school. And there's going to be a lot of, trials and tribulations. And that is what people need to understand, and kids need to understand that it doesn't just come. I mean, I spent 10 years grinding to get to where I'm at now. And the reality TV stuff just kind of popped up and gave me an opportunity. But I wasn't really, the first time I went on Big Brother, I wasn't necessarily interested in any reality TV after that, because I was so driven and determined that I wanted to be in hospitality. I wanted to own my own places, and I knew that path was going to take time. And I basically spent 10 years of, working my way up through a big company. But I knew if I worked my way up into this company and I learned the ins and outs and I used someone else's dollar, that it would give me the ability to learn my craft and be, me willing to be able to do all that underneath someone else's umbrella. And I wasn't like, if I would have got funding to open my own restaurant, 8 years ago, or say 10 years ago, when I had been working for that company for 2 years, I would have failed, because I needed to work through that. I needed to work for someone else. And that's something that people don't necessarily understand, or it's tougher for them to grasp. I basically, when I was in LA, I started with this company, and I was a mixologist, which basically I created cocktails for menus. It's more of like a chef for, a bar or a restaurant on the alcohol side and the beverage side. It's basically a glorified bartender, but ultimately, like, we create all kinds of different concoctions. So it's not just so cut and dry. I did that for about a year, and then I went on Big Brother. And then I came out of Big Brother, and I used that opportunity of me being gone to be like, hey, I want to start to get into management. And that's when I basically was like, hey, I want to be a manager. And they basically lowballed me. They didn't want to have anything to do with me in a management, in the management field. And they basically said, look, we'll give you this amount of money. And it was basically like $25,000 less than I was making for the same company, being a mixologist. And I took it, and I was like, fine, I'll take it. And they were like, okay, I guess we have to make a spot for you, because they were basically lowballing me so I wouldn't take it. So I took the pay cut, and, over the years, I became the director of operations for that company, the director of openings. And they told me that story later. My bosses, they were like, look, that story, we lowballed you because we didn't want you to take the job. We didn't have faith in you. And I think, I'm glad they told me that, because I was determined, and I was like, look, you're going to give me the chance. And ultimately I became their number two. I became the number two to them in all the openings, and they relied on me for a lot, and I became their guy. So it just is crazy how sometimes, like, even if some people don't necessarily think that you're the right fit, it's like, as long as you keep pushing and give, I knew what I was capable of, and I knew what I wanted to do. And I was just very, very determined on it. Company, I call it a group because we have multiple companies underneath the umbrella. So I own a bunch of different restaurants, and I operate those. I own them. I have partners. Some I have partners, some I don't. So Garrett Group as a conglomerate owns a bunch of stuff within underneath the umbrella. We also own a liquor company. We also own a vodka soda company. We also own a staffing company that staffs for larger hospitality brands. So we do placement for chefs and executive chefs and chef de cuisines and different stuff like that, general managers. We also do consulting. So I get hired out to open larger venues for bigger companies. So if they want me to come in, train the staff, hire the staff, just basically bring brands to the public. So we'll develop an entire brand, develop a menu, develop the design of the building, of the restaurant. So we do a lot, but it's all within the hospitality, spectrum, and that's just what we do. And so, yeah, it's one kind of thing that I can kind of manage and operate everything underneath that one radar. And that's a hospitality group. I mean, I think it's huge to be creative in business. I think, even outside of a pandemic, I think you ultimately have to constantly evolve. And if you don't, then you'll die. And I think the thought process behind that is, like, as we watch, you can kind of take things that we all know, like Facebook or Instagram or Amazon and all these companies that we're well aware of. They weren't what they are today 5 years ago. They definitely weren't what they are today when they started. They're constantly evolving and developing because they want to keep our attention. You have to do that on every front for any business, whether you're selling cars or selling burritos. And ultimately, I think that mindset is something that we all have to be, very in sync with. Just like what you're doing, with these classes and these interviews and these meetings, it's like you're evolving. And this is something that I think that will be the future of teaching and give kids in the classroom the ability to listen to people speak and talk and give firsthand advice and guidance. And I think it's awesome. And I think you're evolving just like we all are. And I think it's something to be said with that. I think it was like, what was it, the Great Depression? Like after the Great Depression, some of the biggest growth and best ideas came out of something that was so horrible in our country, was, diminished down to nothing. And then ultimately came back and, with a big boom. We're going to see the same thing happen with what's happening in the world right now. Basically, one of my good friends was flying out to California, and he sat next to a casting director or assistant casting director to Robin Cast, who is the head casting director for Big Brother. So she was trying to get him, and he's like, I don't want to have anything to do with that. And he's like, you need to meet my best friend, Memphis. Like, he'd be perfect for this. And she got off the plane, called Robin, and I met with Robin like 3 days later, and I was in sequester probably 15 days after that. So I was definitely not, I think at least the story goes that I wasn't necessarily I wasn't the first pick. Like there was someone already queued up, and whether they didn't pass the psych test or something happened, that they needed a filler quick, and I was that filler. So it's kind of crazy. I didn't ever make a tape. I mean, the tape that I made was in Robin's office, and I went basically from that straight to CBS lot in Radford, and I basically met with all the executives for CBS.
Now, did you know the show? Had you watched the show?
I was aware of the show. I always had this thing in my mind that I wanted to do reality TV at some point. When I was in college, got to like the semifinals for casting for Real World Australia, and I didn't end up moving past that. And then ever since that moment in college, I was like, okay, I really want to do something. Survivor, Big Brother, Amazing Race, and Real World. Yes, there was 4. So I was like, because in my mind, and back then, those were the 4 main shows. Right. There weren't like a million like there are now. So in my mind, I'm like, look, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do one of those major 4 ones. And I always had that in my mind, but I wasn't actively seeking it. And It's just weird how things happen, right? It's really bizarre. Right. My life has been nothing but that in a nutshell. It's like every year I look back at what I did or went through or accomplished, and it just kind of blows my mind. And I've been doing that year after year, and it's crazy. And this year is no different.
George Bush is president.
Yeah.
Barack Obama just secured his Democratic Party nomination for the presidential election.
Okay.
The Giants played the Patriots in the Super Bowl. Do you know who won?
Giants won that one, right?
The Giants won.
Yeah.
So in the
only Giants Super Bowl in a long time.
So in the Final Four, the Memphis Tigers played
There we go.
Kansas Jayhawks. Do you know who won?
Yeah, the Kansas Jayhawks beat John Calipari.
The Lakers played the Celtics in the NBA Finals.
Mm-hmm.
Who won?
2008, the Lakers won.
Celtics won.
No. Yeah, that was Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce. Yeah, okay, I remember.
Happened, and I think it definitely I think it shaped reality TV a bit that year. Was when the Writers Guild of America had the writers strike. Mm-hmm. So there was no scripted television.
I remember that very vividly because I was the assistant to the vice president at a talent agency in Beverly Hills, and I remember them basically saying, look, you were letting people go because of the writers strike. You can take 2 desks or not have your job. And I go, I'm not going to have my job because working for one crazy agent is like enough. And in my mind, that was when the Entourage days were there. And I was like, in my mind, I was living in LA. I was doing the mixology thing, but I wasn't totally 100% like hospitality was my way to go. I was kind of like, I maybe want to be an agent. And I went through that. I started in the mailroom, worked my way up, became the assistant to the VP, and then the writer's strike hit. And it really showed me, like, I learned the ins and outs of being an agent, and I was like, I'm not an agent. Agents are cut from a certain cloth, and that is not me. And I remember that so vividly because that was that pivotal moment in my life where I was like, hospitality is where my personality, where I want to be. And it was because the writer's strike gave me that kind of like that stopping point of like, okay, you're not going to be an agent. You don't want to do this.
Right.
But yeah, I never really thought about it past that. But I guess you're probably right. You know, no scripted TV, no, you know what I mean?
It's a house like no other, where 52 cameras follow your every move, and 95 microphones capture your every word. This is the Big Brother house. Tonight, 13 complete strangers will enter this house with one goal in mind: to be the last one standing. They will live in total confinement, cut off from the outside world. Every week, the house guests compete for food, luxuries, and most importantly, power. Each week, they will vote to evict one of their own until only one house guest remains to claim the $500,000 prize. An unforgettable summer is about to begin, now on Big Brother 10.
Mike Tyson once said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. So what was your plan going into the house the first time?
I didn't have this mastermind strategy. I didn't know how I was going to get from the beginning to the end. I just knew that my personality was good enough to at least just be me. And somehow I feel like I had a good hand. In my mind, that's what I was thinking when I walked in. I'm like, look, I'm just going to try to be me. And I'm going to just like, I'm going to try to be likable. And I wasn't going to try to be likable. I'm just going to be me.
I'm Memphis. My street smarts and charm are going to make a potent cocktail. I play people for money. I've done it since I was 12.
You have to be a well-rounded Big Brother player, which what that definition is, who really knows? And I think I think the social aspect of the game is very, very important, because your strategy no matter what strategy you have, if you don't have that social game, it falls, it just falls on deaf ears. And ultimately you got to have that element, and you have to win when you need to win. And that's the biggest part. And a lot of that winning the comps, it's like, it's luck. It really is. It's not necessarily skill. It's, it's just whether it falls your way or not.
All right, Memphis, now's your moment. You may now choose between this 66 Mustang and this 69 Camaro.
I want the Camaro for sure.
All right, well, congratulations.
So week one, you win this 1969 beautiful Camaro. What did you do with the Camaro?
It's so funny because that element, like I'm the only person in Big Brother history to ever win a car. And being the first week doing that, it was like frightening. Like, I don't know how I pulled it off, but I took the cash option. So a lot of people on game shows, if you watch The Price is Right or any game show, if you win any kind of vehicle or car, any prize for that matter, you have to pay taxes on it. So if you win, say that Camaro was worth $35,000. So if I took that Camaro, I would have to pay taxes on that $35,000 car, just like you're buying it, right? Or you have the cash option, so you can take the cash value, and then obviously you have to pay taxes on the cash, but you don't have to pay it right then and there, right? So I took the cash option, not because I won money, so I could have paid it for it, but the only reason I didn't take the car is because no one knew anything about the car. So it was like a show car, and I know about cars, so I was like, when was this like 351 crate engine put in? And no one had an answer. So you don't buy a car that old with not knowing like who built it, where it came from, a little bit of history behind it. So that was my reason.
So here it is 12 years later. World is very messy once again. It's an election year once again, and a big one too. It's very similar to the last one.
Yeah.
You now have a car.
For sure.
You have a son,
yeah.
And you have a successful career. So what was your attitude going into it this time?
Well, you know what's weird is it kind of happened the same way. So I got a call from Dan, and I talk to Dan, probably once a month, like we chat. He called me, and I was like, hey, how you doing through COVID? Like, what's going on? And he's like, I got a question for you. He's like, would you go on Big Brother if they called you? He's like, they're doing an all-star season. And I'm like, well, would you? I might go if you go. And he's like, I can't go again. He's like, I'm done. And I was like, yeah, maybe. I mean, look, it's COVID. Like, all my restaurants are like super slow, like barely open. And I'm like, maybe. And he's like, okay. And I'm like, that's a weird conversation. That's a weird phone call. And then literally a day later, I get a phone call from the producers. So that's kind of how it went down. And they called me on a Friday, and I flew to LA the next Wednesday.
Wow.
So again, it was like the same, I mean, even a shorter runway, the same song and dance where it's like, I didn't call that, like I was just, doing my thing, and ultimately they called and they're like, can you get all this paperwork done and get everything in and be on a flight on Wednesday? I'm like, I got to call my ex-wife. I got to call Ashley. I got to see, River obviously is my main concern. My businesses, I have great general managers, and I'm like, I wasn't necessarily worried about them. And I called Ashley, and she's like, you got to do it. She's like, I have this sneaky suspicion, like you just have to go.
So which season did you enjoy more?
Definitely this past one, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, my connection with Dan is a lifelong friendship, and Dan is just one of those guys where you can sit around and talk to all day long, and me and him have that connection. So from our relationship, like I had a blast with him on the first one because I just had that camaraderie with him.
Saying, man, it's got to be 1-2 in the end and death before dishonor, and I think we need to shake on it for the Renegades. Right. I got you. All right, man.
But in overall experience, I was able to have a clear mind, play an actual meticulous game this time, and I actually enjoyed almost everyone in the house this year, and I enjoyed my time. I had a lot more fun.
Okay, Kaser, hit me with the intro music.
Oh,
You got it.
No pressure.
It's pretty good.
Wow.
All right, we're here. We're live.
Feel
Welcome.
good.
Mornings with Memphis.
Good morning.
Our special guest, Christmas.
Co-host, Chris.
Oh, well, okay. Well, we've added a co-host to the format. All right, thanks. All right, welcome.
Would you ever go back?
I don't know, man. When I left, because it's a lot. Like, it really is tough, like being away, and I was like, no way. And then the more that I think about it, sometimes I'm like, ooh. I have a different appreciation for the game as a whole now than I did before, and I think it would have to take some time. Ultimately, I have been able to find a career and a life that has me constantly going, and my attention is constantly getting pulled in different ways, and I'm constantly working on another project, so I don't get bored, and I'm just constantly on the go. So for me, it's very, it's made for me, and I push a lot. I have 9 nephews, so like, I talk to them a lot, and a lot of them are like, I don't know what I want to do in my life. And I'm like, look, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do until I was probably 26 years old. So they see I was a firefighter at one time. I sold shoes. I did a lot of different stuff, but I wanted to be an agent. But I ultimately just kept moving, and I kept working on something. And that's what I tell my nephews. I'm like, look, try something. It doesn't mean you have to do it forever. It doesn't mean just keep moving, keep trying different stuff. That's how life is. And you're going to try, it's trial and error. You're going to find something that you finally love and are passionate about, that enjoy, but it takes trial and error to do
that. Okay, last one. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear Julie Chen say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Oh, here's your $500,000, Memphis. You finally won. Third time the charm. My name is Memphis Garrett. I'm a cast member from Big Brother 10 and Big Brother 22 All Stars. I am a restaurateur and an avid entrepreneur.